I'm walking on the ancient tramway. This was a railroad with logs that galley ships were dragged along. The slaves would all be offloaded, the galley ship slaves, and they would pull with ropes a boat that would come from the sea out here, the Mediterranean, and would come into here and go across and come out on the other side in the Corinthian Gulf. This little tramway saved 3 days of travel all the way around the Peloponnese, which was a very dangerous place to sail. The captains of the boat and the crew would get to go into Corinth, which is right over there. You say, well, that's fascinating. What does that have to do with the Bible? Well, let me read to you what it has to do. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul says, "Let a man so consider us as servants of Christ." Let's do a little word study on this tramway. I can still see right here and right along here the deep grooves that the dragging boats would have made. And to Paul, seeing the slaves dragging the boats on this tramway from Corinth constantly reminded him of something. In the ancient Roman culture, there were millions of slaves. Some say as many as 50 million slaves in Paul's time. There were slaves everywhere, but slaves had classes, almost like federal pay rates in the military or civil servants. There were 8 levels of slaves. Some of them, therapon, a therapist is in English, a therapon was a counselor to wealthy people. You wouldn't have even known they were a slave. Then you get douloi, you've probably heard of bond slaves, you've heard of diakonoi, the serving slaves, liturgoi, the slaves that worked in temples. But do you know what the very bottom level slave that would have dragged boats along this tramway and would have been chained to the galley slave paddles, do you know what they were called? Huperetes. Huper means below. Retes means to row. So below rowers or under rowers or galley slaves. Again, why does that matter? Well, listen to this verse again, and I'll put a Greek word in. Let a man so consider us, Paul said, as huperetes of Christ. Do you know what Paul said? I am an under rower to Jesus Christ. I go through life as the very lowest slave that you see every day from Corinth. You look and you see them straining and pulling the boats across to the other side for over a mile down this tramway called the Diolkos. What does that mean to us today? It's 2,000 years later. This is what it means. Paul said, you want to survive as the greatest servant of God? The best thing to do is to learn some principles from these slaves. One thing about the slaves were that those slaves were totally committed to doing whatever the captain of the boat told them to do. They didn't have their plan going here today and over there tomorrow. They were focused on one thing, doing what the captain said. And specifically, when the captain said, pull the boat, they pulled the boat. When he said, paddle the boat, they paddled the boat. Number one. Number two, a good galley slave realized that the captain was in charge of everything. His food, his water, how long he worked that day, where he worked. So everything was on the captain. Thirdly, they were chained for life. A galley slave actually wore shackles and manacles, and those chains committed him to that boat. He was in it for life. He rowed to the captain's beat. He was in it for life. He totally was dependent on the captain. And did you know that a galley slave was never seen, except maybe when he was pulling the boat right here along this tramway? All the rest of his life, his work, he was never seen because when he was doing his job, he was out of sight. That's just amazing to think about for me. Being in the ministry, I'm surrounded by people that do everything they can to be known, to be seen, and it's so different than Paul. Paul said, it's not about me, it's about Christ. It's not about my plans, it's his plans. It's not I, but Christ living in me. I am his lowest level slave. So this tramway that the archaeologists have uncovered, called the Diolkos, is a vivid reminder to us that Paul the Apostle, who accomplished more than any other New Testament servant of the Lord, gave us his secret. You want a secret to serving the Lord? Serve him like you're a bottom-level slave, rowing to his beat, chained to the job, trusting him completely, in it for life, never seen. That's what Paul said. And that's the message that I think each one of us should pause and prayerfully take to heart and say, Lord, like your servant Paul, I want to follow you the way he did. I want to follow you on the road of life as your galley slave, your huperetes. 1 Corinthians 4:1, as we catch up with Paul right here by Corinth, right here in Acts chapter 18, and right here doing a word study on 1 Corinthians 4:1.